Hello and welcome back to the Shades of Orange. Today I'm going to be talking about all the horror that I read in the month of February. I ended up getting a Kindle Unlimited subscription, so most of the books I'm going to be talking about are things that are available through that subscription. Let's get started. First, I want to talk about the full-length horror novels I read, one of them being The Consultant by Bentley Little, and this is a really weird story about a company that is going under. They are failing as a business, and so they decide to bring in outside consultants, and the consultant that they hire is pretty much evil. Think about all the classic things that make white collar jobs so terrible, and this exists within this book. Think about calls at midnight, people dropping by your home on the weekends, just that 24/7 type of job. Things go from bad to worse. There is a company retreat, which is pretty much a survival nightmare. And what Bentley Little does is so creative. He pretty much creates his own subgenre of workplace horror, and it was ridiculous, but at the same time, it was really funny. I think anyone who works for a really bureaucratic organization will get a lot of laughs out of this one. It's very satirical and just so over the top. It's just ridiculous. I can't say that I loved it. I think I only gave it about 3 stars, but it was so unique that I was really glad I read it still. So if you're in the mood for something really weird, really different, I kind of recommend it in its own way. It was just a lot of fun, and at the very least, you can say that you have never read a horror book like this one before. Next, I want to talk about a super fun slasher book I read this month, and that is Disco Deathtrap by Cameron Roubique. I received a copy from the author and I did a separate review, but if you haven't watched that, this is about a group of teenagers that decide to spend New Year's Eve at a roller rink, and terrible things ensue. They get locked inside and a slasher shows up, and the killings are ridiculous, over the top, and oh so bloody. I just thought this was a blast. This really is meant to be the book version of one of those classic slasher films, and it was exactly what I expected, which was exactly what I wanted to read, and I really did enjoy it. I do recommend it and would love to see more people checking this out. So if you're curious to hear more about it, again, check out my longer review. Next, I read a novel called The Summer Job by Cesare, and this is about a university student who gets a summer job working at a hotel. And there's something a little bit weird about this community. The people at the hotel have their secrets, and she becomes involved with a group of partiers. I think that anyone who is in those university years will particularly connect with this story because it's kind of about those in-between jobs that people get when they're going to school. And it was just a lot of fun. I expected this to be a haunted house story, but I'll say it is not. It actually has a cult angle, which was very gruesome and had some really dark moments with some harm to animals, which may not be for everyone, but you know I love a gruesome story, so I thought this one was really entertaining. It's told from a couple different perspectives, and at times the narration was a little bit jarring, but overall I thought the payoff was worthwhile and it had a good ending, so I do recommend that one. Also by Cesare, I read Video Night, and this is about 2 teenage boys who invite their girlfriends to spend the night watching home videos. This is set back in the 80s, back when people actually had to go and rent VHS tapes. And the story is essentially a alien invasion story because there are aliens that are sneaking into the world and planting their alien seeds, and things just go crazy. This is just so much fun. It's the only way I can think to describe it. I found this book incredibly entertaining. It read like watching a really fun alien invasion story, and it wasn't even that cheesy. It was just one of those books where you just go along for the ride, and I thought the teenagers were very realistic. They were immature and vulgar, and I just loved every minute. It's one you will just fly through, and I definitely recommend that one as well. It was a lot of fun. Now I want to talk about short fiction, and I read Sour Candy by Kealan Patrick Burke, and this was such a fun surprise. This is told from the perspective of a man who sees a child having a terrible tantrum in the candy aisle of a store, and he looks at the mother, who is just haggard and worn down, and just feels sorry for her. But through a weird series of events, he ends up having that child appear in his home and become his own son. And the story goes from there. I don't want to give away too much because when it is short fiction, you don't want to give away the entire plot. It's really good to experience it for yourself. But what I will say is that the child in the story is so crazy creepy. And I think that anyone who's looking for a good story that will pack a punch will love this one. I was so impressed by it. It was one of my favorite novellas I read this whole month, and I just cannot recommend it enough. I will say that I will never eat sour candy again without thinking of this book, and I just loved it. So that is Sour Candy by Kealan Patrick Burke. Now I've read one more story by Adam Cesare, and that is 0 Lives Remaining. This is a novella-length story about an arcade that is haunted by a ghost. A boy dies in a gruesome pizza oven accident at the beginning of the story, and I thought that scene was amazing. And then he proceeds to haunt this arcade. It's set in somewhat the modern day in, I believe, 2014. So it's not an old story set back in the 80s, but it still has a lot of that nostalgic feel for anyone who really appreciates or remembers going to arcades. And this semi-friendly ghost is haunting the arcade, and things get mixed up when he tries to protect this girl that is a patron to the arcade, and the story just goes from there. When it comes to Adam Cesare, I'm learning that his stories are just meant to be fun and entertaining, and it was exactly what I was expecting, and I loved every minute of it. So it was a really good one. Again, one I would definitely recommend. If you're just looking for that like fun horror story, it's a great one to pick up. Then I read Offline, also by Kealan Patrick Burke, and this story is told entirely through Facebook messages. It follows a girl who gets a Facebook request from a young man, and they proceed to message back and forth online, and things just get stranger as they go along. It's a very short story. I'd say it's more short story than novella length. And it was good and creepy. It is done all through internet slang, which wasn't my favorite aspect. I'm not a big fan of that internet shorthand in fiction, but if you can get past that, if you don't mind that, the actual story is quite good and has a pretty great ending, so that one was good as well. Then I read Mara by Richard Denney, and this was such a great story. This follows a young girl who is a ballerina dancer, and she has some really dark self-loathing thoughts. She has an eating disorder, she is in a really inappropriate abusive relationship, and she just thinks she's fat and ugly, and there's a lot of really dark thoughts in this book, so it could be triggering to the wrong reader. But personally, I love stories about teenagers that really go there and will push the limits and really show the darkness and depression of a troubled mind. And you know right from the beginning that Mara is potentially mentally unstable, and there is a question of whether or not she is mentally unstable or possibly possessed. And so I love that the story walks the line between psychological thriller and straight up horror, which are pretty much two of my favorite genres. So no surprise, I love this book. It was so dark, so twisted, and the ending was fantastic. Definitely one of the best stories I read this month in terms of horror, and so I have to recommend this one. If you have not checked out Richard Denney, this was my first place that I started with his work, and it won't be the last because I was so impressed and just love this one a lot. Finally, I want to mention one graphic novel that was horror themed, and that is The Bloody Best of Lenore by Roman Dirge. And this is such an iconic story of a creepy undead girl. The artwork is dark with like really goofy eyes, and Lenore is just really creepy looking. This is incredibly dark. This is a story all about black humor. So if you like really dark, disturbing stories, you might really enjoy this one. There is a lot of harm to animals and children because in all of these situations, Lenore is going about her day doing normal kid things, except for the fact that she is undead, and in which case is just super messed up. and this book goes to so many morbid places. It's not going to be for everyone. A lot of people might be quite offended by some of the comics in here, but I thought it was hilarious and dark and twisted, so of course I loved it. So if you're in the mood for a really dark, twisted comic series, this is a great one to pick up. This is just one of the many volumes that are out there, and so I definitely recommend this. I'll be reading more from this author for sure. So that's it for horror this month. As always, I'll have another wrap up coming, talking about everything else I read in the month of February, including psychological thrillers and science fiction. But for now, I'd love to know if you're planning on picking up any of the books I mentioned. Honestly, I had an amazing month when it comes to horror, so I pretty much recommend everything I talked about in this video. So again, let me know what was the creepiest book you read this month, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.